This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WAFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. Today is Sunday, October the 29th, and yes, it's a nippy 30 degrees according to my thermometer at home. And yeah, 2 days before Halloween. And this is the Prairie Monk Show, WEFT's weekly look at the environment, rails, trails, and greenways, and whatever has been on Dave's mind for the last week, including, I see here, metal. We're going to be talking about Cannibal Corpse or something like that. Just the name you hear on a Sunday morning. Go ahead, Dave. What's up?
So, yes, remember to turn off or drain your outdoor water so it doesn't freeze your pipe. And it's getting cooler. I continually salvage things, so a little bit about salvage first. Flashlight bulbs, batteries. The industry has decided to charge people who accept batteries as a charge. So that charge is recycled, and it now costs you $2 a pound to recycle batteries. I took 15 pounds of batteries, but we have some ourselves, but people bring me batteries regularly because they don't always know where to recycle them. And so it cost me $30 to recycle batteries yesterday. Did so at Interstate Battery, which is quite friendly. And the charge is genuine. We have to realize that if we have technologies that have implications for sustainability, then we have to pay for the recycling. Actually, the batteries have less mercury in them these days because that has been designated. So the chemistry is slightly different, and alkaline batteries can actually be recycled into the general waste. Toner cartridges. We accumulate toner cartridges, and other people do too. And I find places where I go to Laser Edge and drop them, and I think they can mold those again and reuse perhaps some of the material that's not totally used. Curly fluorescent light bulbs are quite a problem because they have vaporized mercury in them. The whole principle of a fluorescent light is to have a mercury vapor, and that vapor can be hazardous. We've been told if you don't have a lot of fluorescent lights to put them in a landfill, but that's not really a good idea. Usually by the time they get put into a crusher, they're releasing their vapor, and not a good thing. So there is some concern that if you drop and break a mercury vapor light, then you need to open the windows, you need to vacate the room of humans and pets, and you don't use a vacuum cleaner. You use sticky tape to pick up the pieces, and you put them in a plastic sack or in a bottle or something like that so they won't escape. There's problems with mercury. it's not as problematic as if you have mercury in a thermometer. If that breaks, it's not as dangerous as a vaporized form of mercury. So you need to be safe and clean, and don't always believe that your curly fluorescent bulb comes green and free of concern. It's right there. You have to watch what you're doing with some of these environmental things just to make sure you're on top of it. Metal. I took a bag of mixed metal, and you need to sort before you go. There's telephone wire, there's electrical wire, there's different forms of aluminum. If you have paint on the aluminum, it's regarded as dirty aluminum. If it's a fish can, it might not recycle as a pop can. You need to watch these categories. A motor has a lot of copper in it, and so that can be recycled as a motor, and people know what to do with motors. In the past, we would actually open up a motor, put new brushes, then clean up the commutator, and recycle it in that manner. I'm not sure that happens anymore, but you need to watch your motors don't get recycled as baling, which is sort of a normal term for every sort of metal there is. It's very low price. It's like 6 cents a pound or something like that, whereas cans are running about 46, nearly 50 cents a pound. There's some economy to this. You can't spend a gallon of gas running your vehicle to recycle, so you need to accumulate these things, which is a problem because it takes warehouse space. Last week I took styrofoam and dealt with styrofoam, but it's a material that can be compacted and saved from going into the landfill. Clothing is another one. I have a little pocket prairie. Often people leave clothing there, and if it's clean clothing, it can be functionally reused. If it's dirty, it can also be compacted and baled for things like tickets or other uses that are not going to involve people directly. So find your places where you can do baling, not a lot, and perhaps label what you think is baling. Doesn't have to go to the landfill. Last week we dealt with cardboard boxes, still over and over. Load your cardboard carefully, spread it out evenly, and then you won't have to have the cardboard dumpster recycled more often, which is costly. You have to know that those trucks that take the material are perhaps doing 4 miles to the gallon. They have an impact on the roads, and so it behooves you to stack your cardboard. Don't stand back and throw in a big box empty. I went to the farmer's market, and I was rather pleased with the farmer's market because people were still there. It was freezing cold yesterday, and it was wet. And so people dress accordingly, and the market was still going. It's another week yet before it closes. But I pick up pockmarked fruit there because my feeling is that there's such a wastage of food that it's really a national dilemma. So I work with Kerry's and get food that is quite good, not saleable as A-grade fruit, but very, very healthy. The indoor market will start soon, and that will probably not have a lot of produce because it has to be loaded in and loaded out, and that is heavy-duty work. And the market hasn't quite made it to everyone's realization. It's more been like a arts and crafts sale before the Christmas season. I took a walk around the mall. I do that because exercise is good. I keep going past the gymnasium and all those people there. It could be producing electricity. I keep wondering, I keep walking in and suggesting that a grad student group be employed to see if they couldn't put a dynamo on some of that equipment so that humans would be producing their own electricity to run the show. Tim Johnson was there. Tim Johnson has been a legislator, and he's now on the Parkland College board. So chatted a little bit, and he walks around the square and talks to people as does so. I had the temerity to suggest that they, on a good fine day, they might also walk the Kickapoo Trail outdoors. Okay, so we have some announcements. David, you might say something about the Folk and Roots Festival coming up?
Oh boy, oh boy. Yes, so we are now 1 week out from the Folk and Roots Festival. It technically, I guess, gets started Thursday, this coming Thursday. But the main events actually kick in on Friday, and then all day Saturday there will be workshops, and then in the evening on Saturday there will be lots of live concerts. Most of the concerts you have to pay to get into in the evening. If you buy a wristband, that gets you in, I don't know how many tens of dollars it costs, but it gets you into every event for free once you've got that wristband, or you can pay some amount of money, $5 to $10, depending on the performer, to get into the events in the evening.
It is in basically around Urbana.
That's right. It's all over downtown Urbana. The days of the show, if you go there to downtown Urbana, they'll have the flyers everywhere to show you all the events and all the different places. One of the really cool things is how many different spaces they use. They'll be using the Indie Media Center. They'll be using the Urbana Free Library. I actually do a workshop on harmonicas on Saturday morning, about 10:30 in the morning, and I'll be in the back room of Pizza M. So when you finish with my session, you can just walk out to the front and get a pizza.
And that's also near to a music sales shop that sometimes does this sort of thing.
C4A is on the corner. Unfortunately, the music shop that used to be in the same space, Corson's, is gone now. They actually have closed out completely. They've been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and Corson's is actually not there on the corner anymore. But yet the space that used to be all Corson's music, lots of guitars hanging in the window, is now all, as I understand it, the Community Arts Folks Community Center for the Arts, C4A.
It's an interesting area in downtown Urbana. One storefront has been broken open there, and the facade is left, and there's a couple of shipping containers in there that are used for sales.
Yes, it's called Sip Yard. As you say, it's like the two containers that you would put on a train to take large amounts of stuff one place to another, and they're actually using it as a storage space or whatever for their. This time of year, they may close that down. I don't know about that. I will also mention, if you just want to go online, you can check out. I've just blanked on the name of the event, Folk Roots Festival Urbana, and you'll get the entire website with all of the times and venues.
Sharon Monday will have a show on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th at the Independent Media Center. She's taking some music and some art from Maria, her daughter's interests. She's interested in doing things with Amazon territory, and this is sort of a fundraiser for that objective. And the Rattlesnake Master Run for the Prairie will be on November 5 at 9 a.m. I think that gets me for announcements at the moment. I was privileged this week to be doing some retro thinking. 5 of us met at Milo's this Thursday, and it was wonderful to have friends and relatives talking to each other. We need to talk to each other a lot to be able to understand each other and to understand the world at large, and to look at things like housing or academia or environment. And so we had a very pleasant get-together there, including holding hands and thinking about the future of what we do. We don't always know what we do. We sometimes preach a little in the hope that we can put things together. But you have to know that the next generation is not going to do the same as you preach. But you hope you do, is leave the skeleton of something that they can work with. And we talk about rail trails a lot, and yes, I ran into Holly, Denise's daughter, and her band. And yes, Creo. And she was commenting that we speak a lot about trails. Well, that's sort of what we're at. We're trying to save the last little vestige of remnant prairie that are on those trails. Not always is that so through cities. It's the remnant prairie that is destroyed. So you can think about a rail with trail through the city. And David and I have been working at that and dropping in pictures. And so last week's program will be up on YouTube shortly. And it ran on Friday and will run on Tuesday at 6 o'clock, Friday 1 o'clock, Tuesday 6 o'clock. And people do listen to that. We probably have to do some advertising of our preaching, but it's because not everyone's going to read everything on YouTube. So we also want to make links so that we'll take a piece out of the last week's program, which was oriented to rail trails, and give you the possibility of a link if we can get hold of our database and know who to send to, how to send it, and what to do. It's a very challenging thing to be working with environment, which is very, very diverse and involves a lot of people, and it requires a lot of energy. And we haven't quite got to that point where we have a lot of do-good jobs that we can have people to do and have the supervision and all the rest of it. That is sort of the next step, and that may into 50, 200 years. So we're looking at elements of the landscape that we should acquire now for future. The Natural History Building has been remodeled, and there was an open house yesterday, and that was rather wonderful. It's a rare privilege to be here. I grew up in the boondocks in Australia and didn't ever know that in my lifetime I would be at the University of Illinois and talking to people who are movers and shakers in the world of action. And so I found myself at one stage teaching botany as a grad student, as probably about 300 undergraduates in botany courses, and those courses required grad students to do the teaching associated with the general lectures. Many of those students would go into the landscape, go into teaching, and they had very little opportunity to do field work. So some of us got involved with field trips to places like Brownfield Woods and Treelease Woods. And it's a very different form of education. It's not something where you can easily put a multiple question test together for. It's something that involves feeling and interaction and how you look at the landscape. So we also worked with honors people who may have had some experience with the landscape previously and were feeling they wanted to do something more than what was happening in a 100 course. So we would work with them to put together research papers on places like Brownfield Woods, where you would collect the amount of leaves that were falling in a tray and try to put a number to some of the very different variables that you encounter, like soil type. So higher soils are different from the lower soils, water gradients, human involvement, like having a road go through a natural area, or canopy cover, understory, invasive species, and so I walked into that building, having taught in that building and been there for quite some time. It had a fire not too long ago, which inspired the remodeling. And that building has been used for teaching for a long time. The School of Life Sciences has its headquarters and its research offices in the Burrell Hall. But the older, richer architecture natural history building had quality of history. Some people that I was listening to had taken quizzes in the attic with a high ceiling, and so they were reminiscing too. And Stephen Myshak is in charge of this. This has been a slight change in the way people have organized departments. So this is the School of Earth, Society, and Environment, SESE. And it is now located in the Natural History Building. But all around the offices and teaching facilities for the biological sciences. And so a lot of the building is oriented to that teaching. That was the case when I was teaching there. We had a fairly regular lab with the traditional tables and didactic teaching from the front. And this is more experimental. This is where you walk into a lab and there may be in the room a blackboard, which may be an electronic blackboard. It may be not a chalk on blackboard, but an electronic visualization. And then there are visuals, and you can take that set of 6 tables and connect your laptop, and so the teacher can have you all looking at screens with the same image, or you can have them each doing an individual thing and coming together later. I asked if these tables could be moved so that you could have a traditional lecture if necessary? And the answer is no, because as of yet, the Wi-Fi or the wireless connection doesn't allow that. So each of these tables has to be wired to for computer involvement. So the tables are spread around, and all can connect with the leader. I talked to Brian Allen, and he was explaining what was going on. He is in biology. He is chair of the Committee on Natural Areas, and some of you will know that Jamie Ellis, who has been president of the Grand Prairie Friends for many years, is employed by them, and it's expanded a little bit so that they now have an assistant person and a secretariat, more or less, that allows the Committee on Natural Area, which operates out of the graduate college, or did so. I'm not quite sure that hasn't changed to being in the Natural History Survey people. So there may be a slight difference, but it used to be director out of the graduate college, and I was a part of that for quite some time when it was more a part-time situation. You have to know that the university has farms that have been donated often all around the state. They usually don't take small donations like just 15 acres. It's usually larger, but there's a need for management of those acres. I can remember having to go to Thompson, way up northwest of Illinois, because the fence had broken down and cattle were moving around. So some of these sites are still used, but some of them are very much a part of our natural history research. Brownfield Woods, Tree Leaves Woods, Allerton Park are all part of the Natural History Survey. So the person I was talking to was in charge of the Committee on Natural Areas, which would have people from zoology or biology or botany involved. And there's some history there. I used to work for Dr. Kendi, and Dr. Kendi was chair at the time, and Lowell Getz was the chair following Dr. Kendi. And so people like Dr. Kendi worked with Audubon to establish an Audubon society that has been very largely our working force in the Anita Purvis Center, the establishment of Bushy Woods. This Tuesday, they will be going to the Salt Fork of the Vermilion, and there they will be looking at birds. It'll probably be wet and cold, but Beth Chato chimed in to say that she'd seen a hawk with a crow in tow, and so you have to see the ecosystem working in Danville. And so indirectly, the Committee on Natural Areas works some with the public to establish things like Bushy Woods and make sure it doesn't become a high-rise housing area and goes to the Park District, and then the Park District developed it. And so there's a public relations area there. The Audubon people have scholarships, and it relates to the committee and the Grand Prairie Friends and to the Natural Area Study Group. So the group that goes to the Salt Fork will be the Natural Area Study Group. And so they all meet on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, and they carpool and go to natural areas. So they're what you call a docent group. a docent group learns about a natural area and then transmits that information to others, like schools and churches and other people that would be interested in this sort of preservation and interpretation. So I was talking to Brian Allen, and he was explaining the teaching situation, which is much oriented to the field as well as to the classroom. I talked to one young fellow in geology, which is part of this school of Earth, society, and environment, and he said that his professor was very interested in getting into the field. He'd been doing things in a laboratory situation for quite some time and would like to get into the field. So when you go into the field, there's all these situations where the geology affects the trees that you can see from the air. You can see the nature of the landscape and how the earth has moved around. So I feel very privileged to be a part of that sort of thing. So next door to that classroom that I moved into was a large lecture theatre. So you have the tradition of a traditional program. It has been remodeled. The lighting is interesting. I stepped into it in the dark, and there was fluorescent lighting up sides, and so the building has been modernized in an interesting way. There was Stephen Marshak was there. He's director of the SESE, and they have a big foyer and a big area which used to be the Natural History Museum. And when they were thinking of putting the anthropology and archaeology museum away from Lincoln Building to a new location near to, on the east side of Granite. That center was going to have a counterpart natural history center. It didn't eventuate, and I'm not quite sure why, but a lot of the artifacts from the museum went to natural history buildings on South First Street in Champaign. Some of this required the removal of horns from animals because the doors had been built over so that it was impossible to get the animal out of the building without sawing the horns off. So I have this interesting photograph of the animal without its horns. But anyway, the current use of that building is mainly by the biological sciences, and they have teaching materials there, and so some of those were on exhibit. It was interesting that Stephen Marshak, who's in charge of that school, has within it mainly geography and GIS, Geographical Information Services, and geology. And it has sort of sustainability potential too. Let me have a look here. I've got it somewhere here. Anyway, that school sits under some skylights, and Dr. Marshak was pointing out that as they remodeled the building, they uncovered these skylights, which were a part of the early architectural design. You have to know that in the early years, like in the late 1890s or 1900s, when museums were going up, there was a lot of concern for light. especially in art. You can destroy art if you have too much light. You can destroy art if you don't have enough light. So there were lots of expeditions to Europe to see how Europe worked with its buildings, like the Art Institute in Chicago is an example of where this sort of thing was going on. So there were skylights, and there were skylights in the Natural History Building, and they were uncovered and not used at the moment for that purpose, but they built around it so that the skylights have access to the sky, and you can see this if you go up above the auditorium for the SESE. You can peek in and you can see the skylights, and then you can see how the skylights have access to the foyer for the school. The buildings were, Ricker's building was kind of smaller, and then it was added onto with the same historic concerns, and the ceilings were positively huge, and those ceilings have been dropped some, so you can tell that sometimes when you see an arched window perhaps cut across at the top. You can see a door retained because it's a door, and it was a door, and it's non-functional anymore. The front area has apparently, perhaps it's wooden beams, and so it moves a little bit, so they couldn't put like a permanent terrazzo down that would be affected by movement. So the old wood has been used there, and it's very nice. The old wood used to be creaky. You could walk around and you would hear yourself walking around. You would hear yourself walking up the stairs. They've done things like taking in the old stairwell, which was a single stairwell, made it a double stairwell, and made the second stairwell the same as a historic Ricker stairwell. So the entrance is interesting and exciting. The attic is no more used. I assume that it's loaded with equipment that keeps the other three floors going. But it used to be that students used to be in the fourth floor too. The rest of the I'd call it terrazzo, perhaps that's the wrong term, but the flooring has got some micaceous material in it, so it has a sparkle to it, which modernizes it some. And there's a big display board that shows a geologist out there with a hammer taking specimens or doing interesting things. And there's some of the old history of a turtle-like creature that was probably 20 feet long, and that's hung on the walls. And so various opportunities to have nooks and crannies where people can, a board could meet, or a student could have a little spot for themselves to do computerized learning. So rather exciting, and I walked around the outside of the building to take a note of it. It's right close to the University Union, and it will be tomorrow. During the week, they're celebrating the opening for geography and geographic information services, and Jan, my wife and associate for many years, has been in Tucson for a long, long time, because she has a very good job there. She's retired now, but she's been in charge of the Southwest Institute for Research on Women, and has done some interesting work, including trying to figure out how to encourage departments of geography around the country to look at women in place as different. They're not all one size fits all. The geography is concerned with place, and so Jan has quite a background in looking at place. If she's in the Southwest, she's working with native populations, with Latino populations, with snowbird populations that come in for the winter, and also Hispanic people. And so it's been interesting, and as a background for her looking at and working with other people, especially she works with one woman in Spain, and they look generally to see how departments are putting in women's studies facilities so that you can get a degree in women's studies, you can look at and do research associated. If we're lucky, we might have Jan to talk to us for a while, but she will receive a distinguished alumni award because she got a PhD here and was on the staff for some time. And so we have a few minutes to look at an interesting phenomenon. I ran across, I was tidying up things, and I ran across an old paper, and in there I encountered a gentleman named Reg Harmon. He was coming back to Champaign in 1987. He had been he'd born and bred in Olney, Illinois, which is south of here, and he after high school he taught school for 2 years, then came to the university and eventually got a law degree. And at the time after that he practiced here for a while. He was mayor of Urbana for 4 years, from 1929 to 1933, and he was the youngest mayor probably in the country, at least in Illinois. And from his practice in law, he enlisted in the Army in World War II and was gradually moved up the procedures to Pentagon and being an advocate for law. And so he has had a foot in several different public situations. The law as a practicing lawyer, and as a council member and a mayor, and in the Army, which also morphed into the Air Force. And every once in a while I like to say something about these people who have set an example for what we might be able to do if we try. We can't always be whiz-bangs, but we can at least put together thoughts and ideas and follow these sorts of people. The other thing I wanted to say was we're looking at some of our territories and with the hope of leaving something for generations to come. How do we do that? One of the places that's been very interesting to us has been Shady Rest. It's a 30-acre plot on the Sangamon River, and it was owned by the Price Paint Company, which, for those of you who've been around for a while, was on Walnut Street and it was a street where the Jeffersonian plat came together with the railroad plat. So it was a sort of flat iron building, so you could walk through from Neal Street, which is on the Jeffersonian north-south plat, onto Walnut Street, which is on the railroad plat. And the Price family had a paint store there, which was probably the oldest in the nation. It was unique. It has a mezzanine. It had wires to the cash people. You would bundle up your bill and the money involved, and you'd send it to a secretariat, which was on the mezzanine. And this was a wire system that was used universally until it was obsoleted, probably in the 20s or 30s. The cash person would put the change there and send it back. It was like a little catapult. You'd get bing, and it would run down the wire to the cashier. So the Price family had a retreat, and the retreat was Shady Rest. It used to be a retreat for people in the horse era that could not take a horse more than about 15 miles from Champaign or from Decatur. It was a place where people met. It was on the Sangamon River, and on the banks of the Sangamon River, so you could go fishing. There were open spaces, so when you look at the forest, it's got large trees and small trees and no in-between trees, which means that the large trees were there when there were flat races or other interesting things. We have a railbed that runs through that territory, and we were fortunate to alert various conservation agencies to the fact that this 30 acres might become available, and Mrs. Price did pass, and this 30 acres is now in the responsible hands and in perpetuity hands of the Piatt County Forest Preserve. And there's a body that's official. They have a tax base, and they have the formality to be able to ask for grant money, and they put in trails that we could not have put in. We managed the site for quite a while, and we stored a lot of railroad ties and things like that there. And there's a nice little truss bridge with a long trestle, and we hope that it's been preserved. So far, Mrs. Price was really very anxious to see that was preserved and put money into preserving it. It needs attention. So as we talk about rail trails and re-railing from Whiteheath to Seymour so we can get historic trains into Champaign, we also have to think about how you could take a train 1 mile down to Shady Rest and have a Chautauqua or some event where people would simulate something like the 1860s. Would people be prepared to come in crinolines and dressed accordingly and have an event once a year? What is the history here? And it's on the Sangamon River, so it's got flatlands to the north, and we would like to think that those flatlands could be bicycle ways. In spring, when you're getting more and more runoff, those flatlands are covered with floodwater. So this would be sort of flatland trails that would be in action in the summer, which is a summer drought. So we look to the north that way, and we look to the west where you go across some tributaries and up to Lodge. And there's always the dream that you might be able to do 23 miles of restauranting on the rails, because at Lodge there's a train line that comes down from Chicago and it goes through Monticello, and it connects up with the Railroad Museum. So it's it may not happen, but when you get populations growing, like I look at a 9-story building and have to wonder what these people do for recreation. A lot of them are tending to beer and restaurant facilities, but there's something more to life than that. So we think about things like art centers. We think about bringing a historic train in and having a venue for community activities between State and Randolph, just about level with the railroad, with the post office in Champaign. How do we bring all these things together? How do we dream? How do we permit other people to dream? How do we encourage them to come up with proposals that we never even thought of? We cherish the thought of Shady Rest and going down there with a train. It has access from what used to be an old Monticello road, but is now called Shady Rest Road. And it's sort of a place where you can bring a bicycle and enjoy it. The understory herbs are absolutely wonderful in spring, and so it's designated as a soil and water conservation district, and it's in perpetuity. So as we dream about our various sites that we have, like at Pope Prairie and Rantoul and other sites, we would like to leave some thoughts that are on the verge of preaching a little bit, but we want you to come up with your thoughts and your ideas and how you can keep these things together and how you can work with roadsides. We're at the end of our time. Thanks for listening. This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. As always, the views and opinions expressed here are solely those of the speakers and no one else.